few years ago, I was in downtown Saskatoon and I saw a billboard that was unlike any I had ever seen before. The Lone Ranger's sidekick, Tonto, was pictured with a simple caption, "Tonto, pray for you." I don't know what it was in reference to, but it touched a nerve that left me asking questions about our national relationship to our First Nations people. Every nation has to wrestle with its own history of race relations. We all have to wrestle with it individually. Let's go back to 1967. My grandparents were visiting our family in the small town of Southampton, Ontario. It was a school day, and I was walking from the front door of our house and down the street 2 or 3 blocks to my kindergarten class. My grandfather saw that I was carrying something, and so he asked, "Kevin, why do you have that big stick in your hand?" I replied all nonchalantly, "It's in case I meet any Indians on my way to school." Well, I don't remember saying that. I don't remember that particular incident. But what I do remember is hearing my grandfather retell me that story over and over again through my life. And every time he would tell the story, he would have a big laugh. Perhaps it was watching cowboy movies, other TV shows that inspired my young mind, like many of yours, to play cops and robbers, cowboys and Indians, and boys against the girls when we were hanging out together. And that's child play, but I think a really important question to ask is whether 5-year-olds can be racist. At that age, I was already aware of the Saugeen Indian Reserve nearby, and I was in the habit of listening to adults in conversation. Remembering that story now makes me a little sad to think that as a kindergarten boy, I would be afraid of a people group and feeling that I needed to defend myself. We fear what we are least familiar with. Nelson Mandela said, "No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. People must learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love, for love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite." It's very likely that we all have discriminated and prejudged others based on ethnicity, social standing, lifestyle, or religion. To have a true understanding of the mission of God, we need to understand God's love for all people of the world. If we're going to be about the mission of God, we must also be cleansed of our prejudice, whatever shape it takes. On today's episode, we're going to start a 2-part conversation with a party of 5. Joining me today is Chris Cobbler, Nelly Latchman, Kellen Brooks, and Joshua Bowers. We're all involved in ministry in the border cities of Windsor and Detroit. This was our small way to talk about race relations and the difference that we are called to make. Hearts change when we really listen to somebody else's story. So I hope that's what you do today. I hope you hear the stories of people that I consider to be friends. This is a really exciting opportunity to have a conversation with a couple people I know and a couple people I don't know. And with all the things that are going on in the news right now around race relations, it's so important that the Christ followers of this world come together, talk about these things, and know how to respond. And I want to introduce the co-host for this discussion. If you don't know me, I'm Kevin Rogers, pastor at New Song Church in Windsor. And we're a congregation that has a lot of focus on around poverty issues in our city. And of the lead team of the pastoral team that work with me at the church, 3 are men, 3 are women, and 3 are white, and 3 are various shades of brown. And we get along fairly well, very well actually. And so I'm going to introduce the co-host now, who is Chris Cobbler, Pastor Christopher W. Cobbler. I'm not sure what the W stands for, but
willing worker.
Chris is the pastor at one church in Windsor, and I've had the honor, the privilege to be with their congregation a couple times doing things, and we just have a great love and respect for each other. So welcome, Chris, and introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. And my name's Chris Cobbler, and the W stands for Wilberforce. So that's Christopher Wilberforce Cobbler. So some history there and some heritage there. I am the senior pastor at One Church Windsor. We are a church that does focus on the marginalized. That's our heart, and we just believe in the missional impulse of the church, that we are trying to participate in what God's doing, not trying to recreate it, just trying to see where God is active and to join in with that. So excited to be here and excited. I love conversation. I love discussion because I think that listening to others, is a great way to learn and to grow in your compassion for what's happening in our city. So maybe I'll start with Pastor Josh from Detroit. Maybe you can introduce yourself, and then Nelly, and then Kellen, Pastor Kellen, maybe you can do the same.
Well, thanks so much. Thanks for having me on. And Wilberforce is like the perfect name for our discussion tonight. That's awesome.
Yeah.
You know the history there. So anyway, I'm a pastor here in Detroit at a church called Cross and Anchor Church. And we have been around. We're actually a really young church. We're new. We started just over a year ago. And our focus, our vision is to see new life in Detroit through Jesus Christ. And we're just kind of in the middle of everything that you're seeing on the news and hearing and reading about lately, and trying to be a voice for the gospel and for those that are marginalized as well. And I'm really glad to be included in the conversation. Thank you.
Go ahead, Nelly. Thanks for coming, Josh.
Hi, I'm Nelly Latchman. I am a Mission Canada worker, especially in Windsor, to the University of Windsor and the students there. Just have a heart for post-secondary students and that whole lifetime journey that they're in. So yeah, that's just my heart for them. I'm also the young adult pastor at New Song, so I'm one of those that works with Kevin. And yes, we do get along. And also glad to be a part of the conversation today.
Cool. I'm Kellen Brooks, senior pastor at Pentecostal Temple Church of God in Christ in Inkster, Michigan, Metro Detroit area, and friends with Chris, and looking forward to getting to know you all as well. And Josh, buddy of mine, he's been trying to get us connected for quite a while now. And yeah. So this is perfect, man. And looking forward to the conversation and dialogue tonight.
That's great. So I think, Kevin, I'm on the first question here. So I'll ask away, and then you guys can each jump in. Want to hear your thoughts, so don't be shy and just respond openly. And it is on the record, so there is that. Yeah. So the first question is: I have seen a lot of statements such as "We are one race." There is only the human race. I don't see color. I understand the intention behind it, but is this biblically sound?
I guess I'll try and say something about that. I would say that I think maybe the sentiment, comes from a good place, but if you don't see color, then in a sense, you're almost dissing what God has created, because God intentionally created different races, different color, different culture. And if you're colorblind when it comes to race, then you actually aren't seeing things the way that heaven does, because it's very clear in Revelation, there's going to be people from every tongue, tribe, and nation. It's not like we get to heaven and now we all have the same color skin. We all have the same culture. We all have the same background. It's like still in existence in heaven. So the diversity is actually what makes things beautiful. So that's just a real brief answer. I think others might have more to say along those lines.
Yeah, similarly, I feel unseen when someone says that they don't see color, because when I look in the mirror, that's one of the first things that I see. When I look in the mirror, if someone says they don't see that about me, that's something that I've had to come to love about myself. And it's taken a long time to love the shade that I am. So to say that someone doesn't see that in me, or they look past that, is to say that, and of course, a lot of the times they don't mean this, but they're saying basically that I see you like me, which is without. And that's even more damaging to the experience that I've lived, because it hasn't been without. All of my life, it's been with color.
Wow. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, the passage of scripture comes to mind. Acts 17:26 says, God has from one blood made all nations. And so I think that it's important to see the equality in our humanity, right? That we're all human beings. We're all in the image of God. We're all of the same blood. Somebody said last night, we're all 35th to 50th cousins, right? So in that sense, we're one race. But like, both of you have said, Nelly and Josh, there are nuances and there's difference that makes us beautiful. And God, he has given us that gift of culture and that gift of ethnicity. And so, yeah, we shouldn't ignore that, because there's something beautiful within that. And it lets people know that there's something in me that you need, and there's something in you that I need. And our culture helps to bring that all together into a lovely mosaic.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think someone just literally told me that God doesn't see race, like that God doesn't see those things, and I always think of James Cone, who's one of my favorite authors, who says that our theological perspectives arise from our social constructs, and race is a social construct. This idea that thought has no independence from our social existence. So since race exists in the world, then it's going to influence our theological perspectives. Right. And so when someone says to me that I don't see race, I think it's an indication that they clearly haven't spent a ton of time with people that have been oppressed because of their skin color, people that have gone through turmoil and struggle because of the color of their skin. And so I think that we have to take on the posture of listening and take on the posture of compassion and empathy, so that we're feeling what our brothers and sisters are going through, as opposed to just trying to superimpose an ideological posture. Kevin, what do you think?
Yeah, it reminds me of our youngest son, Levi, when he was about 4 years old. I don't know if you know Ryan Richardson in Windsor, but Ryan and I were quite close in the early days when I was in Windsor. And so Ryan was over at our house one time, and we all laughed as this naive little 4-year-old looks at Ryan and says, "Hey, you're brown." And I thought, wow, the sweetness of a child that doesn't make the immediate assumptions of looking at somebody and pegging them by what they look like. And I think there's something of the kingdom in that kind of approach, where a person's descriptors are not the first thing that we think about, but like Jesus, the first thing that we encounter is the heart of a person, and being able to see that first. And we last Sunday was Pentecost Sunday, and so Pentecostal churches and charismatic churches and non-charismatic churches all over would have been talking about the upper room. And so for us as Pentecostals, thinking of the Azusa Street revival in Los Angeles in the early 1900s, there was a profound man, William Seymour, that was one of the principals in that Pentecostal revival. And it was this amazing, one of the marks of that outpouring of the Spirit was they described it as that the color code was erased in the meetings, that it didn't matter about a person's ethnicity as they came together to worship. They were all one in the Spirit. And unfortunately, in the history of the Pentecostal revival, that started to go back to whites stuck with whites, blacks went with blacks. And that's why we have Assemblies of God and Church of God in Christ, I think, for a lot of, and in Canada, the similar kind of things, where people get more comfortable with their own similar group. And so what we're doing here today, this is meaningful, but I think it also needs to be a pattern for the Christian life, that we always would have conversations with people outside of our own culture. I mean, the Great Commission is wrapped up in this idea that you start at Jerusalem, but you don't stay there. You get past Jerusalem, where the Jews are, to Samaria, where the Gentiles are, the uttermost parts of the earth. There's this sense of in the outpouring of the Spirit, where there's an empowerment to have these kinds of conversations and these kind of proclamations of how good Jesus is. I just want to maybe throw the question out. Have you had meaningful conversations about race with those outside your ethnic culture? And if so, how do we ask appropriate questions? How do we diffuse defensiveness? What causes in a conversation people to pull back and react rather than hear? I'll throw that in the ring. Who's got some thoughts on that?
I'll jump in with both feet. I actually just had one of those conversations tonight. And so Zoom fatigue is real. But those conversations are important. I think for me, I've been privileged to be in spaces where my relationships are almost forced with people who don't look like me, whether it's a conference I go to or the seminary that I went to. Those that I had conversation with tonight were from seminary. And so I'm thankful for those experiences and circles that I've been able to enter into to have those conversations. And it's always been on my heart too, to force myself into certain spaces for the sake of cross-cultural engagement. One thing that I found beneficial in terms of what I can do to facilitate that is to come to those conversations with truckloads of humility and grace. Mm-hmm. Grace in the sense that people aren't going to say the right things or know how to articulate the right stuff. And so we may say something that shouldn't be said. We may use a slur and don't even know it, or a stereotype, and it just kind of blows over our head. But I think if we come to the table with grace, that allows us to have a safe space to make mistakes. And so that the conversation, we're not walking on eggshells. I think if we're going to have meaningful conversations, we need to have a little thicker skin, kind of be like the duck, let it roll off, and just extend that level of grace. And also humility, and understanding that just because we haven't seen it doesn't mean it's not true, doesn't mean that it's not real. And so we need to come to the table and say, you know what, even if I haven't seen that, I believe your story, and I'm going to try to see it from that angle. So humility and grace are major when it comes to those conversations.
That's really good. I would agree with that. So for us as a church, we didn't really set out to start a diverse church. There's people who that's their goal when they start their church. They're like, we want it to be diverse, and that's kind of like the bullseye. For us, we we just wanted to start a church, and we kind of had, I guess, we were younger in our style or our approach or whatever. But God has blessed us with a diverse church. And I think that what has made that happen has just been authenticity and not trying to manufacture something that's not real, oh, well, we're going to make it seem like we care about this or that or whatever. I think and I'm not an expert on this. I'm new to church leadership, not leadership, but leading a church. I'm new to a lot of these things, and I'm stumbling my way through and making mistakes, but I think when people really glimpse your heart, and they can only do that if they're in close proximity to you.
Right.
And so you have to do life with people that are not like you. And you have to, our church started around a dinner table, and we do dinner parties every week. And during COVID, we've done them online, but I think that was the strength, and that was really what led to diversity. Especially in those early days, was people just sitting around a dinner table and doing life together. And then through that, you have an ability now to have a conversation where, a person, their heart. And now, even if they make a mistake or they say something wrong, or you're I know that, I know that they care about me. I know that they love Jesus, and you have a little bit more grace. So, yeah, I think doing life together and being around people who are different than you is so important.
Nelly, you grew up in Brampton. In fact, you're calling in from Brampton. You're up for a home visit right now. But you grew up in a church that probably had 40 or 50 ethnicities, nationalities represented. And, I think is there much of a difference between a Canadian perspective on ethnicity and an American perspective? I don't know how far down the rabbit hole we can authoritatively go, but at least we can observe what we've seen.
Yeah, so being that Brampton is in the middle of the GTA, which is one of the most diverse places in the world, it's very easy to have a multicultural church because people are just here. And being that it was a very big church, it was easy for more people to come. And also, where more people are, you find more people like yourself. So there was a whole bunch of smaller, I don't know, not to call them cliques, but you find people that are just like you. Something that we did was embracing that difference. Not to say that it was perfect, because we were totally one of those churches that had the once a year potluck where everyone from the different cultures brings in something, and then everyone goes around tasting different things from around the world. Call it Taste of the Nations. And that was the embracing of culture, right? Because otherwise it was unspoken, because how else would all these people from all over the world be in one room together, right? So there's good to that, yes. But I remember there was this one Sunday that our pastor got up on stage, and I don't exactly remember what he was talking about, because when I was in church as a kid, I really tried to be in the nursery to hide away from being in service and just to go to Sunday school and eat goldfish crackers and stuff. But I remember I was like 12 years old, maybe, and our pastor got up on stage, and he was talking about something that had to do with a racial issue. And he broke down on stage. He was crying, and he sat down, and sat down on the stairs and just said, like, to my Black brothers and sisters, I'm so sorry for the way that people of my color have treated you. And I remember some church dads, basically men that I had grown up seeing in the church, being super involved. He was breaking down, crying on the stairs, and they went up to him and surrounded him. And that was like a really powerful Sunday morning moment, but also powerful for our church body, to hear and to see our pastor say, like, I am with you and I apologize. I don't know what I can do better. But at the same time, knowing that he was ready and available to have those kinds of conversations, and to hear that, like, from the stage, that was really big. I can't say that everyone has done that, but it was really powerful. I felt seen by my senior pastor.
Mm-hmm. That's good. Yeah, I would say, and I would agree with what you guys are saying. I don't think you can learn without participation. Like knowledge is less propositional, and I think it's more relational. Like part of the story with William Seymour before the Azusa Street revival is the truth is he was locked out. He had to learn from the window. His color was not allowed in the room. And that's because people didn't believe that he had anything to contribute to the conversation. And so I think that for many of us, the purpose of conversation, or the purpose of us asking a question, is to actually impose an ideology, right? So we want to ask questions because we want to superimpose our biases onto somebody. So our questions a lot of times are loaded with intentionality. Our questions are weaponized. And a lot of times when we're listening, we're just listening as a way of projecting. So like we only attach meaning or value to things that affirm our biases. So I think that to start, our conversations are very confrontational, because we're only listening as a means to convert someone to our posture. But I think that what's important is allowing somebody to appear on their own and on their own terms. So I think that like hospitality, coming to the table, empathy, compassion, all of those kind of spiritual disciplines of learning are actually ways of knowing, because we can't learn anything without participating in someone's story. So I would agree that being relational, sitting at a table with somebody, sitting on a couch with somebody, not with the intent of converting them to your belief systems, and just with the intent of saying, I want to listen, right? Compassion, like suffer with, I just want to know, I just want to learn, I'm going to change my posture. And last thing I think I would say is it doesn't just matter what you look at, but it matters from the perspective that you look at it, So it's not just about looking at something, looking at a race and objectifying it, because a lot of times us, the autonomous subject, feel like we have the ability to objectify any situation. But the truth is, we can't objectify anything, or we can't judge anything or learn about it unless we're with them. So man, we got to take on the posture of learner. We got to sit with, and we got to close our mouths. I tell our congregation all the time, close your mouth, like just be quiet. The Bible says study to be quiet. I think that there's something powerful about that.
Definitely takes a lot of humbling, and just
Humility
being willing
grace.
to be humble in that moment. Yeah.
All right, I'll ask the next question. What is our stance on civil disobedience, given that all authority is ordained by God?
I'll start maybe on that one. So I think with the pandemic restrictions, that's a good test case for how Christians respond to authority. Certainly there are many regulations around all of our behavior right around the world right now, and it really causes you to look and say, well, what's going on? How serious is this? There's all kinds of conspiracy theories emerging, and all kinds of opinions, and it's good to look into these things, but it kind of comes back to, how do we respond to authority? And Scripture says to submit yourselves to authority. It also says, Jesus said, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, give to God what belongs to God. What I've observed is that there are people in society at large who are pretty much intent on disregarding any regulation that's given to them. And then there are people who are on the other end of the spectrum, just fearfully obedient to restrictions and wanting to go beyond the restrictions. So I guarantee that in every one of our churches, there's a range of people that are, being Pharisees about the law, and there are also some who are picking corn on the Sabbath. So I think that, what I'm thinking about is, I have a little more empathy now for parts of the church that are oppressed and being persecuted around the world. And please don't tell me that Canadian or American churches are being persecuted. We don't know what persecution is. To lose our jobs, to be imprisoned, to be tortured, the level of things that go on under persecution. But what you see happen throughout history is that when the church is persecuted, there are people who may have been very black and white about things suddenly discover the world of gray. And if it becomes illegal to have church, the church goes underground. And, so does that mean that, what do you do with that? It really comes down to this conflict of who is the supreme authority that we answer to? And we would say, well, God is our supreme authority. We answer to him. When Paul gives instruction in Romans about submitting to those who have authority over you, they exist to punish evildoers. He was talking about the Romans who crucified people and fed people to the lions and did all kinds of barbarous things. And he says, submit to authority. So, this is not an easy question. And I don't think, and I think that it's a question that you really can't answer honestly until you're really, really tested by it.
I think with the pandemic restrictions, and I know that our cities are a little bit different because of the fact that we're in different countries, but in regards to civil disobedience, I agree. Like, the only real room scripturally for civil disobedience is when we're explicitly told to disobey Scripture or go against what God has said. And I told our church this weekend, I said, people got all excited because President Trump a couple of weeks ago said church is essential. And so churches were like, okay, awesome. Like, we're going to open up. And then our governor here in Michigan is one of the more probably strict governors across the country in terms of stay-at-home orders and that kind of thing. And I think it's funny because, you got people on the left who feel a certain way, people on the right who feel a certain way. But the truth is, no governor or president can close or open the church. Like Jesus Christ established the church. And yes, we do exist underneath the leadership of our countries, but as far as the church operating, the church doing what it's called to do, that doesn't have to ever stop. And like you just said, Kevin, with different countries who are actually persecuted, the church continues to operate even then, just goes underground. So I think with what's going on in our countries right now, I just really feel it's actually an opportunity. I don't think it's a restriction. I mean, like, I understand we're sad, we want to be together, and there are things that we've had to give up. But at the same time, I really feel like God's using this to permeate the world with the gospel. And I don't know what you guys have seen in your churches. I know with ours, like, the reach is just insane. And there's just such a great opportunity right now. So I understand, like, some people feel called to fight that civil battle, and more power to them. I just feel like I'm going to lean into this moment and thank God that he's given us this technology. And I think that we're going to be stronger on the other side of this.
Good.
Yeah, I would say I think that this question is kind of loaded with Western privilege to some degree. We live in a country where civil obedience it can interact with our faith. When the truth is, there are a lot of countries right now where Christianity, by the way, is thriving and Christianity is growing, right? So the Western world, North America, is no longer the center, or is no longer the gravitational pull of Christianity,
Yeah.
right? So in North America, Christianity is on the decline, steadily so. Those are just facts. In parts of Africa and in India and Asia, Christianity is thriving incredibly. Look at the underground church in China, as Kevin referenced. So the first thing I would say, like you said, Josh, Jesus said, "Upon this rock I'll build my church," and he has been, and he'll continue doing it. And there are people that don't have a choice. That if they are going to worship God, they are going to defy the government. But I love what N.T. Wright says about that. Kevin, you mentioned, give to Caesar what's Caesar's and give to God what's God. N.T. Wright basically says that, Jesus says this because the coin had an image of Caesar on the coin. So he says the follow-up question should have been, what belongs to God? And then the answer would have been, anything that bears his image belongs to God. And then, of course, that coincides with Genesis 1:26. Let us make man after our image and our likeness. So issues that relate to, slowing the pandemic and paying your taxes and not speeding, things like that, give those things to Caesar. But issues as it relates to humanity, issues that relates to social justice, to dealing with marginalized people, to systemic poverty and systemic racism, those issues submit to God's law. Why? Because we bear his image. And so I think that, I'm not going to sweat the small stuff. I'm not going to allow my Western privilege to cloud the real issues when it comes to marginalization and to oppression. Jesus still came to set the captive free. And whether that's over against culture's pervasive attempts at assimilation, or whether that's in alignment with what they're saying, it bears. Jesus said, "Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven." So, yeah, that's what I would say, I think, to that.
I concur. I will say that this is not oppression.
That's right. Come on, preach.
That's all I'll say about that. That's all I'm gonna say.
Come on.
Yeah, that was it, Chris.
Well done.
All right, good.
Well, let me ask a question here. When white people say all lives matter in response to someone saying Black Lives Matter, or when people say that they're colorblind, how do non-white people hear their sentiment? And Nelly, you referred to that earlier. You said when people say they're colorblind, you feel like you're diminished in some way rather than appreciated. But what about this whole thing of Black Lives Matter and the white response, all lives matter. Let's talk a little bit about that and some of the implications or maybe how those kinds of things get heard. How should we respond in more gracious ways? Is that a gracious response, or is that actually just a response that diminishes what somebody else is saying? I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure. I think as soon as someone says all lives matter in response, it's like, well, what about me? Right? It's like, well, see me in the midst of this. And we're so used to, in our, Western modern day culture, having things personalized and having things being about us. But this, unless is not about you. So it's like a slap in the face to say that someone who is suffering, who is going through something, has to then turn and look to you and your problem in the midst of this. So yeah, it's frustrating. It's like it really diminishes the amount of work that's going into making something new for human freedom, for human justice and equality, instead of just like, well, hey, see me too. I haven't been having conversations about this, and something that I've seen online is people saying like, well, when Jesus says he goes after the 99, he doesn't go after the 99 because he still has them. He goes after the one. The 99 don't turn around and say, hey, well, what about us? Right? And that's the conversation. And my thought is, would it make a difference if the one that ran away was a black sheep? Would that be a different conversation? So that's kind of where my thought is on that. You don't comfort someone at a funeral by telling them that everyone dies.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Shots fired.
Shots
That
fired.
was good. Felt that. Blood everywhere. I concur. I mean, Jesus Christ, Luke chapter 4, he isolated conditions. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He's anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor, right? He sent me to give sight to the blind. I mean, he itemized those different issues because when that issue is present, that's the issue that matters. And so all lives approach, it's really dismissive. And, to Nelly's point, it's selfish. Those who utter those statements, it reminds me of an image I saw this week of a white guy was at a protest, driving his car, gets out of his car, has a bow and arrow, and starts shouting, all lives matter, and aims his arrow to shoot. I said, what is this? So all lives matter has become the rhetoric of like racism, of just comfortability, privilege. It's all of those things. I mean, a MAGA hat, like it's right on par with all of those images that we see that say, you know what, they don't like us. And so I would caution people against saying that. I mean, it's obvious all lives matter. And if they do, why the issue with saying Black lives matter? It touches a sore spot in people's hearts, and it exposes parts of their character that they don't really want to venture into. So I think I'm more unapologetic now about saying Black lives matter, just so people can know, hey, when one group is oppressed and one group is demonized, we need to let them know that they do matter. Very easy, simple thing to do. Not the easiest for those that aren't accustomed to being on that side of the struggle.
Yeah, for sure. And Nelly, I love what you were saying. That was so good and so powerful. And I think that, as a white guy, I think that a lot of Caucasians, I grew up in Kansas, so I grew up in like the middle of the Midwest of the United States, and a lot of Caucasians, and I think for people that are from that kind of background, it's hard for them to understand the struggle and the things that our African American and Black brothers and sisters have gone through. And I think because they don't understand that, then they'll respond with things like, well, all lives matter. And they just have not yet gotten to the point where they've seen what other people have struggled and gone through. And I know even for me, that was a journey. You know, growing up in Kansas, I've lived now in a lot of different major cities and around a lot of different kinds of races. And now in Detroit, it's 80% African American. And it's like, you know, I think that you have to have empathy. You have to learn. And like, I really think that, honestly, I really think God has to do that work in somebody's life. I really think God has to open somebody's eyes. Even over the last week, I've seen people in our church, their eyes being opened to what other people go through. And, you know, I want to be a pastor. And I want us to be a church that just proudly says Black Lives Matter.
Right.
Because like, you know, you said it, Kellen, like, of course all lives matter. And if all lives matter, then Black lives matter. And all lives can't matter until Black lives matter. So I think that it's a wrong perspective. And like, you know, if you were to go, I even hate saying this, but if you were to go white lives matter, it's like, well, you like have no idea. Like, you would never need that to be said. Right. Because you live in a world that props you up and that gives you all sorts of privilege. And like, you have to be able to understand, like, there's people struggling over here, and they're questioning if their lives matter. Like, how horrible is that? And so we should, like, I just think we should be affirming that. We should be proud about that. And we should stand with our Black brothers and sisters. And I know I don't understand the differences totally racially, what, you know, America versus Canada and all those things. But I know here it's a huge, huge issue.
John Perkins, civil rights activist and author of One Blood, believes the church is the best place for racial reconciliation. He writes, "There's no institution more equipped and capable of bringing transformation to the cause of reconciliation than the church. But we have some hard work to do." Yes, we do, and I believe that. I believe that the church is a great lab for racial reconciliation. We'll be back on our next episode to continue this conversation. I'm Kevin Rogers, and Jesus walks on the streets of Canadian cities. Let's try to keep up with what he's doing. This is Sidewalk Skyline Podcast.